Welcome to Virteva's Let's Talk podcast for March 2026. We're back to continue our Adopting Copilot series, and this month we're going to be focusing in on security. And who better to help partner up with this than our very own endpoint and security expert, Taylor Kocon.
Yeah, hi everybody. Excited to be here, talk about Copilot and security.
Taylor, it's great to have you back. I don't think that we've had you on in a couple of years. You were kind of on like one of our first couple of podcasts, I want to say, where we did like the weird, like 4 different people all sitting in different cubes. So we've come quite a ways over time. We're on episode 38, so glad to have you back, and hopefully we can get you back a little bit more in the future. So Taylor, to kind of set you up, started our series last month, kind of talking about and introducing kind of this mini series that we're doing over the next like 4 to 5 months, talking about why Copilot pilots kind of stall out when they start up in an environment. And today my focus is, or our focus is really going to be on talking about why security teams tend to tense up the moment Copilot enters the conversation, or really even just kind of generative AI in general. And I think kind of to set the stage with that, and I'll forward the slides here for our YouTube watchers, is Copilot doesn't just answer questions, as it kind of changes that information delivery system. And that has a funny way of turning kind of those invisible risks that already exist out there in the environment into visible ones. And kind of when I talk about that, and kind of the anchor point for the episode is Copilot doesn't create the risks, it just reflects it. And that is because it kind of the old adage, or the old way that I used to describe this to people, is like, you've got your SharePoint environment out there, you've got your OneDrive environment out there, and you've got all these cracks from a permission standpoint of overshared files and things that are out there that you don't even realize. And then as soon as you turn Copilot on, is Mary in the accounting department is searching for files, and suddenly she starts finding stuff on the HR SharePoint or on the customer service SharePoint, basically areas that she shouldn't probably have access to. And because that oversharing already exists, and Copilot follows kind of the permission model of the user it's attached to, is Copilot, it's not creating the risk, it's just reflecting it overall because of the permissions that user has. So I thought that you'd be an excellent person to kind of bring on and kind of talk about that today, as we kind of talk through the different slides. Is when we're looking at our own environment, or when we're looking at a customer environment, what are the first steps that we're taking to kind of understand how to buckle down and kind of show and shine the spotlight on, the things that we need to fix first?
Yeah, and I think there's, for us, it's really about, we kind of use like a 3 or 4 step approach, if you will, which is usually, which is very similar to what you see on the screen, where it's, we want to reduce permissions, we want to determine where that sensitive data actually lives, we want to try to define and label it as best we can, and then you can implement restrictions from there that you want. Right? And I think data as the kind of new protection frontier has been coming for a while. Like, obviously it's always been important to protect data, but nowadays, endpoints are pretty, most companies have their endpoints pretty locked down. Most companies are very familiar with things like conditional access, blocking legacy authentication, things like that, even like geofencing, requiring compliant devices, all kinds of stuff. But then when you get to the data side and you open up the environment and look into it, there's nothing, right? There's no DLP in place, there's no sensitivity labeling. So like as you said, this stuff has always been there. It's just, you had to know how to get to it before, and now you don't. You can just ask away and see what you can find.
And I love that you bring up DLP. So for anyone that watches the news probably as closely as like you and I do, is there has been actually a major DLP issue with Copilot for about a month, probably longer at this point. But I saw the article on Bleeping Computer, one of the blogs that I follow, that so you can attach sensitivity labels, for example, or even DLP to different security groups, different files. But the way that it's supposed to work is, all your files are supposed to live in SharePoint or OneDrive. But a recent kind of flaw that got exposed, and this just makes it even more important why you try and keep that stuff off device or off local shares, is Copilot was found, and they're trying to kind of expand on the capabilities where it can actually do more reading from the file explorer level. And that's a big thing coming to Windows 11 this year. But there was a bug found, and it's probably fixed by the time you're listening to this, where if you saved a file from SharePoint or OneDrive and you dropped it in your downloads folder, is Copilot could actually read that file in there, but it didn't care about any of your DLP policies or your sensitivity labels anymore. And it's kind of one of those bug bounty programs is from a cybersecurity perspective, it's important to still classify and kind of put these protections out there to protect your cloud infrastructure. But these little things slip through the cracks sometimes. And that's another one of the reasons why, working with a good IT partner or even a consulting agency like us can be helpful to kind of identify that stuff and be aware and know that, hey, there might be some exposure pieces there. And it doesn't take away from the conversation today where we're talking about kind of guest access sensitivity labels, the importance of applying them to files and creating those policies, and kind of also understanding the overall sprawl that happens in those SharePoint environments where maybe a site loses an owner. Maybe you have, we actually ran in this last week with a customer where they're like, why do I have a SharePoint site that has 150 owners on it or 150 members on it? And it was because at some point somebody added the everyone except external users group to it. So it just grabbed every user in the organization and dragged it in. And that was like an aha moment as I'm talking to the customer, because I was like, oh, this comes up all the time when I'm talking about Copilot with people, is like, these are the things that you want to avoid when you're actually going through and kind of auditing that SharePoint data. And Microsoft has put some good tools out there to help with that, such as SharePoint Advanced Management. Taylor, let's talk a little bit about what we've been doing internally, what kind of our internal working group for data security posture management.
Yeah, I think for us, we're really focused on the reduced permissions right now and lessening our attack surface of SharePoint. And I think that's a great place for any organization to start because it's relatively easy to find. Um, if you have if you have a single Copilot license in your environment, you have access to the SharePoint Advanced Management reports on your legacy sites or inactive sites, I should say, and or sites without owners, etc. So if you do have a Copilot license, I highly recommend to go take a look for sure because a lot of you look at like we're our company has what about 500 or so 600 employees and we have thousands of SharePoint sites. So as you continue to go up in employee count and company age, you're gonna get into the tens of thousands of SharePoint sites and you're never going to be able to control that unless you view those reports. So I think where our goal is to at least start with is reducing those permissions where we can by archiving and getting rid of those old sites that we don't need anymore.
Yeah, and I'll have a slide on that too as we kind of talk through it. But I mean, it's kind of surprising too because we have, I think, close to 2,000 sites, and I think what did our investigation turn up? Like almost 800 of them just hadn't been touched. And some of that could be maybe a project managers or engagement managers on your team that stand up a team site or a SharePoint site every time you start a new project or engagement. Well, what happens to that data? What is your internal process or your workflow for saving or archiving that data? And I think in a lot of companies it's just, oh, well, yeah, we're done. And, they never touch it again. They never go back. It just sits there. They assume that the data is safe. But you could have a whole bunch of people that are permissioned into that site. What happens if one of those identities gets compromised that has access to that site? And that's kind of the exposure risk. And that's, again, where putting DLP policies in place or putting sensitivity labels or even just archiving old stale data or moving it to the cloud, whether you're putting it in like Azure Blob Storage or AWS, can be helpful just to get it off from an attack perspective, right? Is you want to reduce your overall risk vectors, and a good way of doing that is maybe even putting policies in place such as data lifecycle management policies is a good one that we can talk about. Is just say, if this SharePoint site's been out there for 6 months and no one has touched it, no files have been edited, nobody's chatted in a team site, send the owner a message and say, do you actually still need this anymore? And when they say yes or no, or ignore it, which let's face it, that's probably what is going to end up happening is they get the email, don't know what it is, and just don't click the button that say that they don't need it anymore. let's just, rather than delete the files because you might need them at some point, let's not delete them. Let's just archive that site or put it into read-only mode. Let it sit for a little bit longer so people can only access it. Maybe they can't get into it. And when I say read-only mode too, some caution there. Because what's the difference between putting it in read-only mode and just letting it sit there as it is? And the difference is there isn't any, is because if someone still has access to it, they can get in. Maybe they can't download the files anymore, but the files are still exposed. So internally, and I think that this will probably be a conversation that we go back and we talk about on Monday, Taylor, is talking to our internal teams about like, yeah, we could put it in read-only mode to make sure that we don't lose the data, but does that really lower our risk? And I think that the answer there is no. So I think that this kind of gives even us, as we talk to different customers and we look internally, kind of, hey, let's look at the identities. Maybe instead of marking it read-only, maybe we mark it read-only, but we also remove all the users except for a service account owner that can go back and access the site if we ever needed to get files off of it. Or maybe we just create a workflow or a process and put that in place, even a Power Automate script to lift the items and move them to a different area where they'll be locked down, so we make sure that we are saving the data. And this is all kind of like in the vein of zero trust. And zero trust is more than just SharePoint sites and OneDrive. It's about kind of limiting user permissions so that they only have access to what they should have access to. Taylor, what do we do today when we go into an environment, whether it's someone using Copilot today or it's brand new, or we're going in and we're transferring someone to a new tenant? Like, how do we kind of approach from a behavioral standpoint, making sure that the users only have access to the data, devices, identity, SharePoint sites, et cetera, that they should have access to?
Yeah. So to start with, we try to group access based off of role as much as possible. So, if our HR department needs to have access to the HR site, our accounting department needs to have access to the accounting site. We can do access reviews on those groups to make sure that, every 180 days or whatever, the people who are supposed to be in those groups are actually in those groups, and those who don't need to be there anymore are removed. Um, and I think, to continue on that, like you said, there's a lot of different areas of zero trust. And the biggest one I think that we focus on, at least initially, is that never trust, or trust but verify. Some people put it right. You can't get into the environment to begin with unless you perform some certain steps. Obviously, like authenticator using MFA, that's kind of the basic. More and more, we've been requiring device compliance from Intune as token theft has become more and more common. And not to say that a compliant device totally blocks that, but it certainly makes it a lot more difficult for somebody to steal your token and sign in from a device that's not company owned. So those are kind of the two starting places we go. Make sure that the groups are shored up and really secure that identity plane first.
Yep, very well said. And I mean, I'm jumping around on our slides a little bit here, but I mean, baseline security is like one of the first things that I think that we focus on in a lot of orgs. We have kind of our own best practice templates, but Microsoft has started introducing this new piece in the admin center called baseline security. And what this is, and I'll zoom in on it for our watchers here, is it's just a spot that you can kind of go in your admin center to very quickly understand what adjustments that you can make and what type of impact they'll have. This just kind of gives us an idea of, authentication is, requiring phishing resistant authentication for your admins, turning on restricted management, user consent settings, third-party apps. Perfect example there is, and we'll look at this when we look at our agent registry. And you know what? I'll actually skip over to that for our watchers too, so you can kind of get a better idea what I'm talking about. Is when we talk about agent registry with Copilot, is you have a lot of different agents that float out there, and you have this new section of your admin center that you can go to kind of understand how many agents are out there, who's creating them, who's using them, and then like this category that I've been looking at a lot more closely, since this is pretty new in the admin center, got announced at Ignite, is this other. So this is a look kind of at our environment, is agents that we've created, but like, what is that 119? Because we haven't created that many agents. So as I'm starting to kind of poke through and try to better understand that, is I start looking a little bit more at the registry, which this is a frontier feature, so not everyone's going to actually have access to this yet. But this kind of gives you an idea of like, who's building the Copilot Lite agents? How many SharePoint agents do you have out there? How many are ones that were created by Microsoft, and how many kind of are being created by your developers, maybe in Copilot Studio? Now, the one that kind of raises the most eyebrows for me is like these other agents. So, like, what are these 120? So, back in the day, Microsoft used to have this thing called Teams apps that you could go into the Teams app store and you could install. And if you look at a lot of the stuff in there, a lot of it just kind of got rebranded and it's called agents now. So, if you have like these things in there, so maybe like ADP or Salesforce, or maybe these third-party meeting apps that people want to use, is maybe you actually want to look at what you're putting out there and turn some of those settings off. And there's a setting specifically within kind of the agent area that you can kind of go into and say, I want to allow our team members to create their own agents and share those agents with other people in the org. I want to allow Microsoft's agents, because they're doing a really good job of kind of creating their own. Because I think that people kind of get writer's block or agent block when they go to create their own agent. They just don't know where to start. So this is a good starting point from them. But then you have that third option, which is third-party publishers, which are those old Teams apps and other apps that are becoming available out there. Do you really want people to be able to just go out there and click on add for an agent that you didn't create, you don't know anything about it? And I think our recommendation, especially as this is becoming more prevalent with the all agents or the Agent 365 piece in the admin center, and it's kind of promoting and it's giving you more visuals into it, is I've been telling our customers as we sit down and we kind of do like Copilot workshops with them, is like, unless there's a reason for you to actually have that turned on and you know that a lot of people are using those, maybe you should turn that off and you should go in and whitelist the ones people actually need, rather than just say, well, here's your Rolodex of third-party agents. Just go in and find what works for you, because you have limited control over it. You don't know what it's talking to. You don't know what you're transmitting outside of the organization. So this is another kind of powerful area of the admin center that I wanted to kind of spend a little bit of time talking about, just so that people know it's there. Again, it's frontier right now. And what frontier essentially means is that it's early access, is your beta testing for Microsoft on some of these new features. But even though you can't necessarily see the map, is you still have the ability to see the different registry of agents and what's being used out there and change some of those settings. Anything you want to add to that, Taylor?
Yeah, back to zero trust. I think allowing all of the apps that anybody wants to add is, obviously not something from a zero trust mindset that we'd want to allow, right? It kind of breaks that trust but verify. Um, the it's a lot like OAuth, excuse me, OAuth apps, or adding enterprise applications to Entra ID, right? Yes, users can only give permission to, or view what they have access to view, but that's all their emails, right? That's all their files. They have access to all of that, and malicious programs can certainly exfiltrate that. And obviously, we want to control that as much as possible, because once it leaves our environment, we lose control of it.
Yep. So kind of moving on as we're looking to start kind of wrapping up the podcast for the month, is I think I want to talk a little bit about where's the best spot to start. So we talked about SharePoint Advanced Management before, but I think that probably the first spot that you really kind of start looking is data security posture management. This is a new tool that's out there. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see that it says preview on the screen right now, because Microsoft cannot help themselves from branding a tool with one name and then changing the name of it every 6 to 12 months. So this was originally called DSPM for AI, Data Security Posture Management for AI. Now it's just called Data Security Posture Management. And I think Microsoft's kind of, the way that they're looking at this now is, well, we don't want to just, do posture management for just AI. We want to do it for everything. And that's kind of what this blade is in your Purview portal, is it gives you the ability to kind of go in and kind of get kind of key highlights and insights on agents, visibility across all your different apps, the ability to kind of go in and click on links to take you to the right portals that exist out there. And that's what this is too, is this is It's not the area that you're going to actually make the changes in a lot of cases. It's the area that's helping point you in the right direction. So, for example, is if you need to prevent data exposure in Microsoft 365 Copilot in different interactions, is this will help you identify where that sensitive data is. If you need guidance on DLP policies or recommended policies, is you can kind of click through different tabs in your menu or your blade here, and it'll point you in the right direction. If you need to go in and understand maybe where are sensitive information types being exposed, or where do we need to create sensitive information types, you'll be able to see that through the Activity Explorer here. But that Activity Explorer is just an extension of Compliance Manager, which is another area that exists within Purview. So data security posture management is kind of bringing everything together, single pane of glass, but you are going to get pointed around. Probably the one thing that I would say on a two, and I'll let you kind of chime in, is that one of the frustrating parts that I've had with the classic portal versus the preview portal is Microsoft is doing a pretty good job of putting reports in here. But a lot of times I feel like when you click on some of these reports is they don't actually take you to the visual that you saw previously. And I think that that's because they're still kind of, they're making the spaghetti in the kitchen. Like
Mm-hmm.
they're mixing the sauce, they're boiling the noodles, and not everything is completely done yet.
Absolutely.
I imagine, have you seen that? You've probably seen that not only here, but in different portals over the past probably 5 to 10 years as well.
Yeah, Microsoft, since I work in Microsoft pretty much all day, every day, that's what I'm most exposed to. But I know, especially with AI, it's a problem everywhere. The cart was put well in front of the horse as far as security and restricting AI. It was, it's kind of allowed to do whatever it wanted. And, in most organizations, unless you, especially with the Microsoft Copilot side, unless you're going in and actually taking control of that, then that's still the case, right? But to echo what you said, yeah, this DSPM is a wonderful place to start especially if you're specifically want to focus on that data plane, because Purview is all about data management, right? Compliance, more or less. Another great place to look is Secure Score in the Defender at security.microsoft. There's not just data recommendations in there, but there's tons of other recommendations as well for, identity, teams, endpoints, a whole bunch of different stuff. So although there is a lot of, and also before I go too far off topic, use Copilot to help. I mean, or, whatever AI tool you prefer. Um, Copilot's built in, as you can see, like in the screenshots, there's Copilot up in the little right-hand corner, and you can ask it questions as an administrator to get insight into some of this stuff, because it's great that we have all this data, but a lot of people get analysis paralysis and they don't know what to do with all of it, right? So
Yep.
use Copilot to help you kind of, continue on the process of securing it.
Yeah, 100%. And it's also probably worth mentioning too that from an admin perspective, you mentioned earlier one Copilot license gets you access to SharePoint Advanced Management for the entire environment. Same thing applies to the Microsoft 365 Admin Center with Copilot. Is not only do all of your admins get access, even if they don't have a Copilot license themselves, but they also get access to that Copilot M365 admin agent. In that agent, which I actually internally, we rolled it out for our EUC team so that they, rather than having to dive through 6-7 different lanes of dashboards, which again, you can probably attest to is a giant pain in the butt sometimes, is now you can just kind of ask questions. So if you want to know how many SharePoint sites are exposed with no owners, or how many, do we have a DLP policy in place for this? If you add Security Copilot into the mix as well, completely different license. We're not talking about that today. And we did a Microsoft training on it earlier this week, and it was good training. But I think a lot of the surface information that was already available out there was just kind of regurgitated to us, though we did get some good questions asked in there. So I appreciate Microsoft making the time to go through that with us as well. But yeah, so your analysts and your security admins are going to get access to that agent to help you take advantage of it. We're going to talk through those Purview dashboards, the Defender dashboards. I still often find, especially from DSPM, when I'm looking for something or I'm trying to understand how did this get exposed, who has access, who's using third-party apps, Defender for cloud apps, I still think is way better than DSPM right now. And I think that that's just because they haven't fully baked it in. Another thing to account for too, and this is, you know, unfortunate is that you still need an E5 license, an M365 E5 license to be able to take advantage of DSPM right now. I'm hoping that they loosen the restriction up on that. And maybe I should step back too. I think that as long as you have an E5 security license, you can use it. M365 E5 is tied to security Copilot consumption credits. I had that mixed up in my head for a second. But kind of last thing I want to talk about is DSPM for AI is a great spot to start, but also just kind of doing a quick analysis or an assessment is Microsoft has this built-in tool in SharePoint Advanced Management that I have up on the screen where you just click a button and it basically goes out there across all your SharePoint sites and it looks for, and I'll zoom in here again. It looks for site inactivity, missing site ownership, which when we ran this on our own environment, I was very surprised to see that we had a site owner on everything. Maybe we have a good Power Automate script in place that is assigning owners when they're absent. But then also broken permissions inheritance. So this could be that a file got moved around from site to site, or org-wide site permissions is someone just shared something with everybody or used that everyone except for external users permission when they were sharing something else. So this gives you a good way to start kind of going in and focusing your lens in a little bit more, whether your team is doing it yourself or you're working with a partner to kind of help with that stuff. This is a good spot to start doing the cleanup. But Taylor, you mentioning too the use of a security, or not even a security Copilot agent, but just giving a Copilot license to a security team member, or maybe even creating a baseline identity. Give it a Copilot license and then start searching, see what you can find. Search for confidential data, search for pay stubs, anything that you think you might be able to find that shouldn't be exposed, then take it up a step. Apply it to a different role if you're using role-based access. What can they find? What shouldn't they be able to find that they are finding? And just kind of keep stepping it forward from there until you feel like you're in a better spot. And that's not necessarily something that you need to have your overpaid engineer doing, as it could be you have an intern kind of poking around and creating reports and documenting all this stuff out and then bringing it back. And then as you're fine tuning, looking at that stuff and applying restricted search or protection labels or DLP policies on what gets found to further lock down the environment. Anything else
Very
from
well
your
said.
side? Oh,
No, I said very well said. I think, yeah, this SharePoint advanced management is, I mean, almost required now if you're trying to secure your stuff against access from Copilot. That broken permission inheritance is a huge one that I think people forget about. Even if a site has the right permission at the site level, if somebody went in and broke the inheritance on a folder in there and added 100 people to it, good luck, right? The only way you're going to find that is if you pull a report for that site or if somebody tells you. So this is a great place to go and look and see what's going on. Lift up the floorboards, I guess, let the light in.
yep, for sure. And I mean that, and you put it really well. I mean, the real security question shouldn't be, can Copilot see this? It should be, should anyone be able to see it, and who should be able to actually see it? And again, like Copilot, it's a license that you apply to a user identity, and it is going to have the same permissions as that user identity. So it is very important to kind of start tackling first at the identity level to, understand from a role-based access perspective, are we actually A, doing that to begin with, and B, how do we get to that place? But then also looking for those other kind of cracks and gaps that are out there, either in SharePoint or OneDrive. I think that, and we're not going to go too far or too deep into this today, but as Microsoft continues to beat the drum on just jamming AI and everything it can in Windows 11, is Copilot being in the File Explorer, Recall being added to more Windows 11 Copilot Plus PCs, which is just it's a Windows 11 PC that has an MPU in it, is a lot more awareness needs to be made around those types of tools. And where the risks are is like Recall. Do you really at the enterprise level want something taking screenshots of your PC every 5 seconds and putting them into it's a biometrically sealed app data folder at this point, so it's not easy to access, but you can actually start applying, I think in the spring here, maybe early summers, you'll be able to start applying like MPIP labels to that kind of stuff to kind of black it out. So if you don't want it exposed, it won't be in those screenshots. But like, do you want that on? Is it already on in your environment? Did your admin leave it on, or did you not realize that it was turned on and maybe you need to lock it down? And when Copilot, and kind of back to the comment that we were making about DLP and identity labels being ignored when a file gets saved locally. Like, how is that going to affect things that are in the file explorer? How is that going to affect things that maybe someone took a SharePoint site and they added it to their OneDrive sync client? Well, all those files are actually on a physical device now, while also being in the cloud. So if, for example, those DLP labels or the MPIP labels aren't being as effective because there's a bug, what do you do from there? And again, it really kind of comes down to hardening the endpoints, hardening in the environment, and making sure that if you do have files in your environment that are super sensitive and they could potentially get out of the environment, are you encrypting them? Are you putting watermarks on them and all that jazz?
Yeah, and sort of the last thing I'll add, I think, is as you've kind of talked about all the preview features and different things that are going on, it's if you don't have somebody who's sort of on the cutting edge of this stuff, you really should, because the AI cat is already out of the bag, and the more security that gets added to it and more options we have to control it, the better. So I'd highly recommend, if you don't already, you have to have somebody keeping track of this stuff. What's coming in AI, especially not only just the features that Copilot adds, but what's being done to secure it.
Yep. And that's all about technical governance, security governance, Gen AI enablement. How many of these tools do you actually want out there? Are you all in on one AI tool? Are you an open AI shop where you want to bring as much in as possible? So you want people using ChatGPT and Gemini and Claude. And there's nothing against using that. I mean, there's enterprise agreements that you can certainly sign up for to better protect your data from being exposed. Though all these models say that they don't share it or don't train their models with it. I wouldn't trust it unless you're probably on an enterprise agreement. We try and point as many folks as we can to Copilot, but like even now we're doing workshops with folks that have 1, 2, 3, 4 different AI tools in the environment, and they're kind of taking a
Oh
good
yeah.
look at all of them and trying to find what works best for them. I mean, we've been talking Copilot for a year and a half, 2 years on the podcast, and there are just certain things that Copilot doesn't do well. PowerPoint used to be one. Now with the new Frontier PowerPoint agent, which again, I built this deck in about 25 minutes today using that agent and just kind of touched it up similar that I did last podcast. It's gotten considerably better. But that is using it's using a different LLM. It's using Claude on the background to do that stuff. So making sure that you have the enterprise agreements and you know what your actual acceptable use policy for different AIs is, and making sure that your employees know about it too, is going to take you a long way. And that's kind of like where I'm kind of closing out here on that center of excellence. And we talk about how important it is all the time. You can use these center of excellences as an adoption hub for employees to kind of understand what they should or shouldn't be doing. But it's also just a good spot to kind of also house all that technical governance, acceptable use policies, and also kind of awareness around what you should be doing, what you shouldn't be doing. And it's also a good spot for just, your employees to raise questions. Like if they go in and they do something and they feel like that they shouldn't been able to find a file, raise it in a channel. Like let your security team know. If there's nowhere for someone to reach out and ask a question, or they don't feel comfortable going directly to someone, is, share your story, share your experiences, and just have the organization from an executive leadership standpoint all the way down to your customer service teams just be looped in and understand what you're seeing today, how you can take advantage of tools, but also how to plug holes and protect your business. I appreciate you coming on the show again.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. You are more than welcome to come back as much as you want. You and your dogs.
Hopefully.
The next time up, we're going to be shifting from security to money, or rather a little bit more talking about return on investment. We're also going to be doing some talk about cloud solution partners, which Virteva, we are a cloud solution partner. Microsoft's making quite a few changes in July to how licensing works. They're bringing down some value from some of the more kind of like not necessarily obscure, but kind of more off to the side licenses like Intune Suite. Some of that stuff's coming into Microsoft 365 E5. We're seeing some benefits come to E3 as well. So we're going to be talking about all of that, still within kind of the Copilot context. And we'll kind of continue our little mini series on taking advantage of Copilot and enabling and kind of further pushing out adoption, kind of getting some money back on it. So again, Thanks again, Taylor, for joining the show. And thank you guys for tuning in either on YouTube or listening in on our audio-only version. If your organization is interested in Microsoft 365 or you're already using it today and you need help with implementing or managing those services, you can contact Virteva by emailing us at letstalk@virteva.com or by visiting our website at www.virteva.com. Thanks again for joining, Taylor. We'll let everybody else go, and looking forward to seeing folks again for our next mini-series episode at the beginning of April. Take it easy, y'all.
Right.
Thanks.